Let's continue with the World War II. In previous lessons, you've learned about the totalitarian governments in Asia and in Europe. So you learned that Germany at that time was ruled by the Nazi Party, Hitler. Italy was ruled by the Fascist Party, Mussolini. And Japan was ruled by a number of militarists. 你聽咯，德國、意大利同德國、意大利同日本喺納粹、法西斯同埋軍國主義嘅影響下，成為咗一個極權國家。Okay? Then these countries were making aggressions in different parts of the world in 1930s. Germany making aggressions in the eastern part of Europe, Italy focusing on North Africa, while Japan mainly having attacks in China. What about the other countries' response at that time? Britain and France, the leaders of the Western powers, were basically adopting one policy that was called the appeasement policy. So simply by sacrificing some interests of the small nations, they're trying to appease or fulfill the demands of these aggressors. However, this makes the aggressors even more aggressive, in fact, because they know that they won't be punished, so they become even more greedy. So we will continue to talk about this following incidents: the outbreak and the cause of World War II. So by looking at this note, after Britain and France appeased Germany and Italy's aggressions, Hitler and Mussolini continued to expand their territories, which finally led to the outbreak of World War II. World War II started from 1939, officially ended in 1945. It's a 6-year war. So let's have some revision on the previous incidents happening in the 1930s. In 1935 to 36, Italy invaded Abyssinia, that is today's Ethiopia or China in Africa. On March 1938, Germany had always had the ambition to unite with Austria because Hitler himself is an Austrian. So in 1938, Germany annexed Austria. This was one of the first steps they made in the Central Europe. In 1938, same year, in September, Germany, using an excuse that there are 3 million Germans living in Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland, so they marched into this area trying to occupy it. These actions called the attention from Britain and France. However, they at last signed the Munich Agreement that is allowing this part of Czechoslovakia to be ceded to Germany, which was basically by sacrificing Czechoslovakia to appease Germany. So this is one of the key symbol of the appeasement policy. When we talk about appeasement policy, we always use this as an example. Appeasement policy. We stopped here, so we'll continue. After this appeasement policy, obviously Germany didn't stop. They became more aggressive. So in the following year, on March, they even occupied the whole Czechoslovakia this time. Now this is the moment that Britain and France realized that finally realizing that the whole appeasement policy was actually useless in containing the aggressors. Okay. Useless in maintaining the world peace. So they eventually abolished the appeasement policy. In fact, in this month, Britain signed a pact with Poland at that time, Britain promising Poland that Britain is going to protect Poland from the Germans' invasion, because they were already thinking that Germany is going to head to Poland very soon. It would be one of their first targets of the whole Europe. So later on, Italy also invaded Albania in April. So you can look at the map here. Italy is here, Albania is here. So they invaded Albania, but then it was one of the very final last achievements made by Italy, because during World War II they basically did nothing but cost Germans lives. Because, for example, in World War II, Italy then headed to Greece, but then they couldn't fight with the Greece, and then calling Germans to help them. In Africa, they're doing the same thing. So on, just keep asking for Germans' help in the World War II. So we are not mentioning any Italy's achievement later on. This is the very last appearance of Italy in World War II in our notes. Okay. So that after Italy invasion of Albania in April, then following in August, here comes an important pact between Germany and USSR. It was called the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. In Chinese, it is 德苏互不侵犯条約. So it's showing that Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, USSR, Russia at that time was having a cooperation. One very important thing is that Hitler started to realize that one obstacle of his whole invasion plan would be USSR. His program of expansion wouldn't be success if there was not Soviet permission. What does a Soviet permission mean? Because Hitler was trying to go east, but then, just like what we have learned in World War I, when Germany started World War I, it was facing France and Britain declared war on Germany also, while at the same time, Russia also mobilized their troops. So that in World War I, Germany was facing a two-front war, that is from the side facing the French, and also in the eastern part, it was also facing the Russians. It was not a very, very good situation for Germany. It scattered their force. So they didn't want to repeat the same mistakes again. So they trying to cooperate with USSR so that they can avoid a two-front war with France and Soviet Union. While in the same time, USSR know that Nazi Germany was actually a country that was anti-communism, while in the same time, France and Britain, they are the capitalist country. So Stalin, the leader of Soviet Union at that time, was afraid that if Germany, France, and Britain eventually cooperate together and forming a union against communism, that is the Soviet Union. Okay, we all know that after World War I, USSR became a communist government. So they were afraid that these Western powers is going to cooperate together to against them. So before Britain and France joined together with Germany, USSR now take the first step in making friends with Germany. And also, by looking at Germany's ambitions in the Central and Eastern Europe in these years, USSR themselves were also worrying about that they might be the next target of Hitler, because we can see that Hitler or Germany, they keep moving eastwards. Czechoslovakia is in the eastern part of them. They're having interest in Poland, also eastern part of them. Then they will keep moving eastward. Eventually, they might attack USSR. So before they're attacking the USSR without any notification, USSR thought that it was a good chance to cooperate with Germany first, so that we can make sure that Germany would not attack them all in a sudden. Therefore, in 1939, they signed this Non-Aggression Pact. The Non-Aggression Pact lasts for 10 years. make sure that the two sides promising them they would not attack each other. They would ratify it after the 10 years, but then we all know that the war lasted for 6 years only, so they didn't have to ratify it. And in fact, Germany later on broke this promise. And there is also a secret treaty signed among the two countries that they would secretly be dividing Poland. The western part of Poland would be given to Germany, and then the eastern part of Poland would be a part given to USSR. So by looking at all these, Germany is now very well prepared. She's not afraid of a two-front war. She's not afraid that now Russians is going to mobilize their powers. She only have to focus on the western side first. So that in September the 1st, Germany attacked Poland because they wanted to unify the East Prussia with Germany. Because as you remember, after World War I, Poland was established to separate Germany, and there's another piece of land in the East Prussia. It was called the Polish Corridor， 波蘭走廊，隔開咗德國同埋東普魯士喺一戰之後。So Germany was eager to take back this Polish corridor, so they initiate this attack to Poland. Okay, so write down the answer. That is, the attack, the next target Poland is to unify East Prussia. Okay, so then what are the following actions by other countries? Britain and France, as we say that, they signed a treaty with Poland in March in 1939. So they promised that they're going to protect Poland. So this time they sent an ultimatum, 最後通牒, to Germany, asking Germany to withdraw from Poland. But then Germany, of course, they refused, as they always do. So that the two countries eventually declared war on Germany, which marked the beginning of World War II. Armed camps. So World War II was fought between the two powers, the Axis powers and the Allied powers. For the Axis powers, you know the Chinese for Axis power is 軸心國, and the Chinese for Allied power is 同盟國, or sometimes we call it 盟軍, 盟軍. So you should know which the team members of each team. For Axis powers, they are the Germany, Italy, and Japan. The Nazis, the fascists, and the militarists. For Allied powers, we have Britain, France, China. China would mean the Republic of China, ROC, 中華民國, but not PRC. There was no PRC at that time. Soviet Union didn't join the war until 1941, as well as United States. Put a star next to the two countries joining the war because the joining was of the utmost importance of the whole war, because they were actually turning the whole situation upside down. It was an important turning point of their joining the war. Okay, so let's go to the cause of World War II. So in the cause of World War II, as we mentioned, that the outbreak of World War II was directly caused by the invasion of Poland. So in September 1939, Germany occupied Poland with less than a month. Used the strategy, we call them this Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg strategy in Chinese is called 閃電戰. In English, we call it the lightning warfare. The key point for this warfare is about the speed, and it have to be surprise attack. One very important part would be the Air Force. Germany Air Force at that time, called the Luftwaffe, put an important position in the whole warfare, because as you remember, after World War I, Germany was not allowed to have any air force. So after Hitler became the Führer of Germany, started to rebuild the air force, rebuild it into a Luftwaffe, because in Hitler's eyes, he thought that the air force was just like the Reich's arm， 帝國之臂，對佢嚟講，空軍就好似帝國嘅手臂一樣，係好重要嘅，強而有力嘅。And also, as you remember that the national emblem of Germany was having an eagle on it, and for the helmets that the soldiers wear in the World War I, there was a single eagle-headed helmet, so that to Nazi Party, to Hitler, the Air Force of Germany was just like the eagle for Germany, a symbol for Germany. So they were trying to make the Air Force the most powerful Air Force on earth at that time. With the Air Force bombing alongside the soldiers rushing on the ground, the Blitzkrieg was a very successful strategy. They were able to wipe out a whole piece of area in a very short period of time, in just a couple of days, and they were able to occupy the whole area. One very significant example is that they only fought Denmark in 4 hours, but of course Denmark was a very weak country, but in the same time, the Blitzkrieg strategy used by Germany were able to ask Denmark to surrender in just 4 hours. So after this occupation of Poland, the European continent entered into a period of phony war. 假戰, there wasn't any direct military conflicts emerged between the Allies and Germany until 1940, where Germany was planning for one thing, that is to attack on France. At that time, Britain and France have been thinking that Germany would be using the same old strategy, that is something like the Schlieffen Plan. As you remember the Schlieffen Plan, Germany would be attacking France through Belgium. But it turned out to be a failure for Germany in World War I. Britain and France thought they were doing the same thing, so they put some forces in the northern part of France. In the same time, they were also preparing for the attacks by building a defensive line here. That is, in this part, they were building a defensive line called the Maginot Line. We're building some fortifications, obstacles on this line. We're building stories high fortress so that the people can live inside and they can stand by for the war at any moment. They thought it was a very, very good defensive line. In fact, they put a lot of money into building this whole defensive line, and the whole structure was not completed until 1940. It cost them for more than million of dollars, hundreds of millions. So they thought it was a perfect defensive line, and they also know that they have to station some forces in the north part of France. So they thought that now they have secured the Belgian border and they have secured the French-German border, they should be safe. They're less worried than before, as to the thought that they've made enough preparation. However, they're actually miscalculating the German strategy, because Germany didn't plan to attack either situation. They didn't plan to attack from north or south. In fact, there was a German troops being divided into 3 groups at that time. They're pretending to attack from the northern part here. So they draw some of the British and French joint forces to this part, trying to counterattack the German invasion in the north. At the same time, they pretended to attack the marginal line by sending some troops here. So it also attracted some of the French soldiers to this part and also confronting the German soldiers here. However, the true forces of Germany was actually invading here in the middle through a forest in Belgium called Ardennes. Through this part, because in France's plan, in fact, they thought that no, Germany is not going to enter our territory through this area because it was a forest area. Tanks were not able to get through. It was impossible for the tanks to get through. Soldiers could not get through. There's no way for Germans to come through this, to come into France through this area in Belgium. But Germans did so, and they succeeded. So their forces coming from the middle part, they quickly turned to north. Oh, sorry. They quickly turned north, and they were able to surround. And originally there were some British and French soldiers here, so Germany trapped these soldiers in the northern part of France. They are now being surrounded. At the same time, the southern troops here also held some of the French soldiers here, so they were unable to make any support to the soldiers in the northern part, while the other soldiers continued to move forwards, and they were eventually occupying the whole France, occupying the capital of France, Paris, in less than 6 weeks. And at the same time, French were being regarded as a general case more backward in the technological level. They didn't use a lot of modern telecommunications. They still used the horses as the transportation methods. They still use telephones. They didn't use all those kind of radio, all those kind of modern telecommunications. So it was believed to be one of the reasons that they were reacting so slowly to this German surprise attack. And there's a photo showing Hitler standing in front of the Eiffel Tower after he had occupied this beautiful city of Paris, and he was now standing and just appreciating the scenery of Paris. He's now the master of the city. Now, by the end of 1941, or by the end of 1940, Germany had already occupied a lot of areas in Europe. According to this map, you can see there's only some neutral countries, such as Spain, Turkey, which Turkey later on joined the war in 1943, and she took the Allied side. Also Switzerland, but Switzerland is basically a place for Hitler to wash money. 所以是銀行 okay. Nazi party put all their wealth into the Bank of Switzerland. So later on, when Nazi party were actually being defeated, the money was still being placed in the Switzerland's bank. And Switzerland were able to get some money from nowhere. In fact, it was not their money, but then it eventually go into the Switzerland bank after the surrender of Nazi party. They were a neutral country, so Hitler simply stole all his wealth in Switzerland. Safe enough. Okay. Finally, Europe was only left with Britain undefeated as an Allied powers. Most of them were being in the grasp of the Nazi party at that time. So Nazi are now turning to the ultimate enemy, that is the Soviet Union. In 1941 June, they attacked the Soviet Union. Hitler broke his promise and attacked the Soviet Union suddenly. Hitler just simply always wanted to invade USSR because one very reason is that there were a lot of resources, such as the oil reserves, and also there were a lot of agricultural resources. For example, in Ukraine 喺烏克蘭係大量嘅農產品嘅，即係種植大量嘅農產品啦嚇，係成個蘇聯俄羅斯嘅糧食提供地嚟。Ukraine was rich farmland, providing the agricultural needs to all people in Russia, basically a lot of people in Russia. And nowadays Ukraine was still the key food provider for the world. 可能到而家都係糧食嘅主要生產國，大概係全球第3左右嘅位置啊。And also, Ukraine is also a place with rich resources, oil, and nowadays we got natural gas. So nowadays Russia is always still wanting to hold Ukraine on his hand. 可能到而家都好有呢個價值，因為佢而家有天然氣嘅。跟住蘇聯啊、俄羅斯一路都就係要烏克蘭，就一路都要烏克蘭，就因為咁解啦。So the first reason is that they want to acquire the resources. And the second reason is for Hitler's racial theory. He always think that the Slav people they're inferior. We learned that the Aryans they're superior, Jews they're inferior. In fact, Hitler also thought that the Slavic people, 斯拉夫人, they were also the poor, the low-level people in Hitler's mind. 即係大家覺得斯拉夫人都係低級嘅，同時蘇聯大量斯拉夫人。In Hitler's mind, a place, a land with such rich resources was being ruled by such inferior people. He thought it was unfair. Why we Germans, we are only holding this very small piece of land, but we are such elites of the whole world. But those people, they were like the scums of the world. But then they are now able to obtain so many resources. This should not be the case. 希特勒覺得有咩搞錯？即係居然可以俾一啲咁低賤嘅人種，佢哋仲俾佢哋咁多資源，根本就係錯嘅成件事。So one of the ultimate expansion was to go east, to get back the place that the Germans deserve to have. 嗰啲係應該係德國人應有嘅地方嚟嘅，係嘛？高質嘅嘢就應該配高質嘅人咁解啦嚇。資源梗係俾翻啲識用資源嘅人啦。So, Hitler created this word, Lebensraum. Not created, he adopted this word, living space. He said that the Germans were looking for living space, so they were expanding. The living space that he was referring was basically Eastern Europe, which was USSR. So he eventually attacked USSR despite they've signed a non-aggression pact for 10 years, but he broke the promise for less than 2 years. At the beginning, it was of a very, very upper hand, the Germans, because they were attacking all in a sudden. Russians weren't well prepared. So in the first few weeks, especially in the first week, Russians lost lives very, very quickly in a very, very high speed. And the first few days, 3 days, already hundred thousands of Russians losing their lives. In this attack, Germans keep bombing from the air and the tanks marching in a very, very fast speed. However, Russians adopted some special strategy later on. They started to use this, what we call nowadays, 焦土政策. Looking at the map, or actually from your knowledge, you would know that Russia is of a very, very wide territory, very, very big country in terms of their size. So that Germany, when it was trying to get into Russia, it was actually going through a lot of area. There were no person living there, no man song, 冇人地帶. And then they go to some villages. So when they got into some villages, they would like to capture some of the useful resources in the villages. Maybe they have to travel in no man's song for 2 days, then they can reach a village, and they will grab all the food in the village for storage, for their supplies. Russians know this point. They know that the destinations of each village may be very, very far apart, so the German was trying to grab most resources in every villages as they can. So Russian had this kind of order, that is to burn everything. If they know that Germans are coming and if they know that there's no chance of winning, burn the things and run away. Sometimes they would even burn the factories. Factories were important because they were steel. Steel can be used as the weapons. If they're collected by the Germans, it can be useful resources for them. They even they even set up the fire on the factories. It might cause serious casualties. People might be affected. They might also get hurt, but it's okay. Just that we don't. The key point is that they don't want Germany to have any benefits when they get into that village, when they get into the factory. They couldn't get anything they want. And they know that the supply lines was now getting very long because the territory is very broad, so the supply lines was getting very, very long. That the supplementary team of Germany's may not be able to catch up with its troops on front, while at the same time the troops couldn't gain some resources from this enemy's hand. Then Germany was gradually falling into a situation of running out of resources。招數政策就係、總之我哋燒晒啲嘢都唔益你，係嘛？點知你會唔會攞嗰啲嘢嚟？你攞有啲工廠裏邊有啲鐵，跟住你攞鐵嚟，我哋諗住用咗佢嚟嘅，重新整嗰啲武器係嘛？或者你可以俄羅斯裏邊啲工廠裏邊有嘢食嘅，咁跟住之後你攞晒啲嘢食出嚟，咁你自己食咗佢係嘛？咁你着數，咁啊你着數咪即係我哋唔着數，咁唔得噶嘛？咁所以咧，佢哋就做咗呢一樣嘢。However, at the end, Germany was losing not just in this situation, but in the fact that at that time there was a harsh weather. But looking at this picture, you can see winter in USSR was extremely cold, so that Germany was not well prepared for this long-term fighting. They didn't expect it would fight for so long. They didn't expect it would enter the winter, so that they didn't prepare much. For example, they didn't prepare the clothes. They didn't prepare enough food. They didn't even prepare something for their weapons. Yes, when the weather was too cold, the weapons weren't able to work. They were too stiff. But for the Russians, they were well experienced. They know that in winter that the weapons will have some problems. They knew that at night they have to put some blanket on the weapons to make them warm. The Germans didn't know it, so at night they were just sleeping. And then, when they wake up, the weapons were unworkable. But for the Russians, they wouldn't have these mistakes they've experienced with how to deal with the weapons in the cold days. So eventually, Germany failed to reach their destination, Moscow, and they withdrew finally. It was the very first defeat they encountered in the World War II and the European continent. And there is the third page. Let's go to the third page. Then for the Pacific War, after talking about Germany, let's go to Japan. Japan, they had the Pearl Harbor incident. It was happening in 1941, which led to the US participation into World War II, joining the Allied force. Why did the Japan suddenly launch such an fierce attack on the United States? And it was like a challenging the United States. It sounds impossible, but in fact at that time, the United States was actually imposing an economic sanctions on Japan, imposing an embargo on some oil, some natural resources. While you know that Japan is an island country, they didn't have their own resources. They had to import that from other countries. Or worse, if they couldn't get any import, they have to take by themselves. So they wanted to invade some other countries with rich resources. The target was Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. However, these islands, many of them were protected by the United States, such as the Philippines. Okay, and also it was a Pacific fleet of the United States, 太平洋艦隊. They were actually stationing in the Pacific Ocean, the Pacific Sea. So that now that people know that, the Japanese know that, but we have to do so. We don't have any oil resources anymore. We have to get that from other places if we cannot import them. So they were planning that in any ways they're going to drag the United States into the war. So what about this? Let's destroy the United States fleet before they could actually enter the war. So they launched this Pearl Harbor incident attack, was trying to destroy the United States naval power as soon as possible, as they have no chance of recovery. Before they can recover, Japan had already acquired most lands in Pacific Islands and Southeast Asia, and Japan can take them as the base for them, and they could already have a lot of resources to actually confront the United States before the United States was recovering from the serious attack. So they have this sudden attack on the naval base at the Pearl Harbor, trying to destroy the whole naval base. So it was in December the 8th. It was a Sunday, and it was a Sunday morning. So the United States, many of them were Christians, soldiers, the sailors, the nurse, many of them were Christians. So on Sunday they go to churches. They simply wouldn't work. They're resting, they're playing around, hanging around. The Japanese, they're different. They work every day. They're hardworking, so they're working every day, even on Sunday. So it's just like what they've been doing, even on Sunday, even on wartime. Wartime Sunday morning, perfect day for Japanese. 日本人社畜嚟㗎嘛，咁社畜即係24小時都做嘢，每日都做嘢。星期日大家都放假嘅時候，我哋嚟一個 surprise attack the Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. People at that time still weren't very alert of having a war because they thought that Hawaii, firstly, Pearl Harbor was a beautiful island. Sounds like a perfect place for vacation. And also, they didn't imagine that someone would attack in such a peaceful moment. Then you can see the photo is showing a ship being sank by the Japanese. There were a lot of air bombings that day, that morning, and many ships were being sank by the air bombers. Eventually, there were more than 2,000 Americans being killed in this incident. So the whole news, when it was spread back into the United States, the Americans were furious, angry about this. The president at that time, Roosevelt, 羅斯福, even made a speech describing that this is the day of infamy. Of the United States, 國恥之日，即係美國有史以嚟最羞恥嘅一日。Okay, so with this attack, now the United States, the citizens or the people, they're now very keen in joining the forces, and they eventually announced that they'll be joining the war and taking the side of the Allied powers. So it started the Pacific War. It was the beginning of Pacific War, 太平洋戰爭. There started a lot of battles on the islands, Midway Islands. 中途島戰役喺1942年 1942, the Japanese were being massively destructed by the Japanese fleet were being massively destructed by the United States. They lost 4 aircraft carriers. 喺後來嘅中途島戰役裏邊，日本失去咗4架航空母艦啦。太平洋戰爭嘅局勢開始轉變啦。Japan was then later on being the keep losing in the Pacific War after 1942. In 1942 and 1944, there were a number of battles on the islands. 奪島之役有幾場奪島戰役啦。And Japan suffered severe loss in all these Pacific Islands battles. They lost basically in every Pacific Islands. They lost the Philippines back to United States, etc. In 1944, basically every single Pacific Island was then back into the United States, and in these battles, Japan was trying their best to strive for to fight until the last moment. So there was a terrible result of the Japanese soldiers that in all these battles there were around 80% to 90% of death rate。基本上每一場嘅奪島戰役都係死90%人，日本係死90%嘅士兵嘅，大概都係。So at the very later part of that, they started to have this group of people. We call them they was mentioned in previous notes. They were the kamikaze. 神風特攻隊 used launching serious suicide attack on some warships and aircraft carriers of the United States by hitting the target, not using any bombs, not using any throwing any bombs to the ships, but simply the pilots will be controlling the aircraft and hit directly onto those ships. At the very beginning, at the very first few times, it was quite successful, but later on when United States know that the Japanese are doing these things, they knew that they have to protect the aircraft carriers more and more carefully, so that later on, after a few times, such strategy was not that useful anymore. But it was famous because what people can do these things. What were they thinking at that time? They must love their country a lot. And later on, in Pacific War in 1944, the situation have already been decided that Japan is losing. At the same time, in the European continent, after the Russian entry of the war, the Eastern Front, Germany were gradually losing in the Eastern Front. They were unable to resist the Soviet counterattack. So in 1944, the Allied powers were having a very, very good situation at that time that soon they can be winning. So they started to plan for the liberation of France. They were planning about relanding on France. They lost France in 1940. 4 years later, they were returning for France. The Allied powers, formed by the American, British, and Canadian soldiers, ABC Force, they were planning for a project that was called the Operation Overlord 大君主行動，咁就係諗住重奪法國。What strategy would they be using? They would be using a landing on the beach that is called Normandy. 打算透過喺諾曼第呢一個海灘登陸。So they were planning on the 5th of June at that time originally, but due to the poor weather, they postponed it to the next day, so it was on the 6th of June in 1944. It was called the day of the D-Day. They called it 登陸日。So these joint Allied forces were landing on the Normandy beach, and they were entering France with also other paratroopers， 同時有傘兵啦，除咗係喺海灘搶灘之外啦，仲有啲傘兵降落去個海灘嗰度。Paratroopers, the Navy, were sending the soldiers onto the beach. Then they were using around 2 months. They were eventually reaching Paris. In around August, they liberated Paris and eventually freed France from Nazi control. And Germany was suffering a serious defeat in France, and also in the Eastern Front, it was also suffering from the Soviet attack. Soviet attacked, basically not attacked, they took back Poland in 1945. Poland, Hungary, the capital city of Poland, Warsaw, the capital city of Hungary, Budapest. They took back these cities in the spring of 1945, and they were approaching Berlin in April. The Soviet soldiers were approaching Berlin in April. Hitler was in charge of this final battle of Berlin, but it was a defeat, an obvious defeat. There were not much soldiers left for Germany. Weapons, resources, there were not enough war materials for them to fight anymore. While the Allies, there were unlimited supplies of soldiers and weapons. Hitler knew that they are at the brink of defeat, so that he committed suicide in 30th of April with his wife, newly married couple. They committed suicide in this underground headquarters at that time. 喺個地下碉堡，係因為類似用嚟防空洞，好多時一啲元首例如 Mussolini and Hitler, they actually had them underground headquarters for safety reasons, as they're afraid that there would be bombings. So underground would be a safer place for them to discuss some of the major, let's say, tactics, strategies, or so on. Killed himself underground headquarters. His successor then planned on the unconditional surrender, 無條件投降. So Germany finally surrendered on the 8th of May. We call it the VE Day. Victory in Europe Day. With Germany surrendering, then here comes the final one in the World War II, that is the Japan. The United States were planning on a final attack on Japan. That is, if they still are not willing to surrender, then we would directly attack Japan, the homeland of Japan, the islands of Japan, 直接進攻日本本島. But the war planners in the United States also have a concern that it is actually not very economic. How do we say that? If we are attacking the Japanese islands, then our United States, our soldiers, it's going to cost us a lot of soldiers' lives, because it's not a very, very easy war, because the Japanese, they are now well prepared along their coastlines. Our American soldiers, if they wanted to land on Japanese islands, these soldiers will be easily killed. They didn't want to sacrifice these soldiers, so the war planners were thinking, how can we reduce the casualties of ourselves into the least casualties? Okay. They want to make Japan surrender without losing their own forces. So they were turning into this item, the atomic bomb. The most destructive weapons at that time. They invented the atomic bombs, and they dropped 2 atomic bombs on the 2 havens in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In Chinese, we call them 广岛 and 長崎. So 廣島 is in, both of them were in the West Japan. They were not in the East Japan. At that time, East Japan was Tokyo. Tokyo was already under a serious bombing of the Allied powers. 東京大恐襲當其時已經不斷恐襲緊東京啦，呢啲地方。So they selected Hiroshima, and at the beginning they selected not Nagasaki, but 小倉. Nagasaki, 長崎同小倉, both of them were in the southern part of Japan. They were in the Kyushu area, 九州, and 小倉around Fukuoka. So originally Kokura was their first priority. However, on that day when the pilots were flying on the sky of, when the fighters flying on trying to get to the destination of Kokura, they gradually discovered that he actually couldn't locate where Kokura was because the clouds were too thick. He couldn't see the cities clearly. So the pilot switched to his second choice at that time, that was Nagasaki. Nagasaki was a substitution at that time， 其實只係一個後備嚟嘅啫。咁但係最後就呢個後備就被換上場，成為咗原爆嘅第二個城市。So in Hiroshima there was around the two atomic bombs that the name. The first one in Hiroshima is called the Little Boy. The second one in Nagasaki is called Fat Man. So by listening to the name, then you should know that the Nagasaki one is actually more destructive. However, Hiroshima is a larger cities, more densely populated, more urban. So dropping the atomic bomb in Hiroshima caused for more than 100,000 deaths, while in Nagasaki was a more backward city, caused for around 60 to 90,000 deaths in Nagasaki. But total then it caused for more than 200,000 deaths in these two atomic bomb attack. Japan eventually surrendered unconditionally. It was too much for them. These two attacks were too severe, unacceptable, too devastating for them. So they announced for the unconditional surrender through radio at that time. Tenno announced this unconditional surrender through the radio. We call them the 錄音放送 at that time. It was the first time that the civilians were actually able to hear the voice of the Tenno. So they signed the armistice in September. Therefore, the day of this announcement was on the 15th of August, were being marked as the Victory over Japan Day, VJ Day. And this day marked as the end of World War II. We can go back to the research exercise here. Let's go back to research exercise. Therefore, you may know the answer for the question: why did the United States drop 2 atomic bombs to Japan in August 1945? It was because the United States were looking for a method that could cause them the least casualties with Japan's unconditional surrender. They wanted to end the war as soon as possible. Okay. We should have written down every answer.